Welcome to Brain Lady Speaks with Julie Anderson on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network. Julie Brain Lady Anderson is considered to be one of the nation's top experts on the brain-personality connection. She has been inspiring her audiences to fire up their brains and ignite positive changes in their relationships. And now she is here to bring that knowledge to you. The information she shares will help those who hear it to accelerate their success in life and business through the discovery of their natural gifts and maximizing their brain power. When you learn to tap into the potential of your natural gifts and the power of the brain-mind connection, there is no limit to what you can accomplish. Today and every Wednesday on Brain Lady Speaks, you'll explore the latest findings to see how they have practical application in your life. And now, get ready to join Julie Anderson on Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network. Take it away, Julie.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is a beautiful day here in, well, actually, it's kind of cold. This is Julie, Brain Lady Anderson, here on the Brain Lady Speaks radio show, coming to you from beautiful Northern California, which happens to be quite chilly at the moment, actually. Believe it or not, here we are, June 15th. Of course, anyone in the Mid-East or the East Coast is probably going to laugh at me. We're like at 46 degrees at the moment, and I'm feeling freezing. I've got a scarf on and big socks on. It's kind of funny. We're kind of wimps out here. You know, we get used to our 80-degree weather. Although it does get pretty cold during the winter, we are just having a little bit of a cold spell. Anyways, on topic, we are here to talk today about the teen brain, part 2. Last week, we discussed a lot about the brain structure. And today we're going to talk what's there and what's not there and what's wired and what's not wired yet. And today we're going to talk about how that even gets more complicated by throwing in those hormone fluxes that happen so much during the teen years. But before we get to that, I want everyone to be sure to reach out and connect with me. This is something that I mention on every single show because I really do mean it. I really want to connect with my listeners. I want to have you guys email me or connect with me on social media, just to give me feedback, give me ideas. You know, as you're listening to the emotion or the personality of the show itself, what are some thoughts or some ideas that you think would be a good fit that you want to see me talk about? I've got, we've got tons and tons of research books here on tons and tons of different topics dealing with the brain and the brain personality connection and happiness and, all of this neuroscience. If there's something you want to talk about or you want to hear me talk about, want to hear me do a show on, give me that feedback. Send me an email at info@brainladyspeaker.com and we'll respond. If I can get to it, I'll do it. If not, I'll have one of my assistants do it. But generally speaking, I can make the response, and we'll connect. We'll see what we can do. If you think of a good show, a good interview, a good person that you think, oh, Julie should interview her, or him, or whatever, then let me know. I'd love to have the connection made as well. There are amazing, amazing people out there who have such wisdom to share, and I would love to be able to to highlight them on the program and to introduce them to people. So connect with me either via that email or as Purple Brain Lady, Julie Anderson, Purple Brain Lady, on Facebook, @BrainLady, Twitter, @BrainLady, on LinkedIn, any of those avenues you can connect with me. And you can check out the shows, past shows. When I refer to past shows, go to the Brain Lady Speaks radioshow.com page to listen to past shows. Or we are on iTunes. So go to Brain Lady Speaks, search Brain Lady Speaks, and get the podcast feed, subscribe to the podcast feed for the Brain Lady Speaks show, and you'll be able to go back and listen, of course, to download all of the past shows as well. So you'll be able to paint the whole picture when I talk about topics that I have discussed on past shows. So I want to become really connected to those of you who are out there taking your time to listen to this information. All righty. So with that in mind, back to the topic of this show. So I kind of had June set out as the parenting month. You know, what I wanted and there's actually going to be 5 shows because there's 5 Wednesdays in June. So in June, been all about parenting. And in order to really be, I shouldn't say in order to be a great parent, you can be a great parent no matter what knowledge you have. But what is helpful, what gives us a little bit of an edge and reduces our frustration as parents, is when we understand what's going on. We understand what's happening. We're able to look at our kids and go, okay, they just reacted in this completely irrational way because they're not completely wired yet, or because this is most likely taking place within their brain. And because of that, they're being irrational. But I have the blessing to have this knowledge, so I can react rationally and handle this with great understanding and reduced frustration based on that knowledge. So that is the benefit of really understanding what's going on in the brain, or one of the benefits. Another great benefit is knowing what we can do to help build and foster their little brain growth. So in the first show of the month, we talked a lot about the developing brain from in utero right up to pre-adolescent. What's going on in the brain and what parts of the brain are massively, massively growing during that time. And I gave you some hints on how to just aid that growth and help their brains to develop massive neural connections that will stick with them for a lifetime and will give them an edge up in education and in developing their own self-esteem, because that's incredibly, incredibly important as well, obviously. And we'll get to that this month in addition to the other things that we're talking about. And then last month we talked a lot about, or last week, as I said, we moved into that adolescent brain and the parts of the brain that are there and that aren't there. And today we're going to focus on the effect hormones have on the brain. And as if the massive changes that is happening within the brain of an adolescent, it isn't enough. Talking about the lack of development in the prefrontal cortex that we dealt with last week. And remember what the prefrontal cortex is for. It's for reasoning, logical thinking, problem solving, those types of things. And it's just not wired. So as if these difficulties and these challenges within the development of the brain isn't enough for an adolescent to have to deal with, now you start to mix in the quite often fluctuating hormones, because it's not until you get into your 20s that those hormones really start to level out and be on a fairly balanced regulation on a day in and day out process. During this adolescent, it's just up and down, and it can actually be quite volatile at times when you add the lack of development in certain parts of the brain and these hormones that are going up and down and sideways and backwards, and it can get quite crazy, because during this time these hormones are rushing into the brain and body at wildly different levels at each day, and this can just kind of throw the brain in a tizzy. And we're going to talk about the reason why that happens and this hormonal effect on the brain. And when you get these to understand these dramatic changes that are taking place, it helps you to understand why you could have a child that was just happy and outgoing and, vivacious and always smiling in their, before they hit the teens. And all of a sudden they hit their teen years and they become highly emotional, irrational, unreasonable teenager. And you're just like, as a parent, we're going, who are you? And what did you do with little Johnny? Because you're not the same one baby I gave birth to 14 years ago, right? Sometimes that happens. But it has to do with all of these crazy things that are going on in the executive center of the body, in the brain. So we're gonna give some focus to that. Now, understand that these hormones, of course, are a critical portion of what goes on in our body. So hormones are a critical part of the communication between bodily functions and regulating those bodily functions and processing the incoming data. So as data comes in, for example, it's cold, these hormones get in gear to increase the body temperature. right? They're all part of a very critical balance that carries these messages from this incoming data to different parts of the glands that are in the endocrine system and to the brain, and help the brain and the nervous system to regulate these different tasks that we need for survival. And it's kind of interesting because hormones are kind of these funny little thing, or I should say, neurotransmitters and hormones are kind of a funny little thing, because it's interesting to note that in some cases a hormone can act as a neurotransmitter. It is innately a hormone, but it can move into certain portions of the brain and act as a neurotransmitter. For example, vasopressin and oxytocin are two peptide hormones that are released into the circulatory system from the pituitary gland, and they act like a neurotransmitter in the area of the brain, in the central synapses area of the brain. So at a number of central synapses in the brain. So, and there's a number of other peptides that act as both, that kind of do this run this dual job. And these hormones are called part of the neuroendocrine system. So it's all something that helps to regulate things. And I'm going to talk about that. We're going to go to break here in just a minute or so, and we're going to talk about melatonin. Because melatonin is kind of this really cool little hormone / neurotransmitter that is amazing in the effect it has in the body. And over the last, couple of decades, melatonin kind of started. I think it was probably back in the 1990s, maybe into the early 2000s, that neurotransmitter was like this, or melatonin was like this buzz thing. It was really popular supplement that you could take that would aid in your sleep. And I'm going to talk about the reason why that is and how that is different in the teen brain and why we need to be aware of that when we come back from our break. So we're going to shoot off to break here for in just a couple of seconds. And when we do this, I want you to get focused, get out your pen and paper if you're not driving and listening on your mobile radio or your mobile podcast, and join me back after break on the Brain Lady Speaks radio show.
With her thorough understanding of brain chemistry, Julie Anderson provides you with tools and processes that will change your life in a positive way. Julie uniquely blends science and psychology when she shares her knowledge and information with businesses, entrepreneurs, women's groups, and families to improve workplace morale and productivity, parents creating dynamic relationships with their children, and women achieving more in life and business. Julie Anderson will be right back with Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network.
Congratulations on being the proud owner of an adorable, soft, cuddly, sweet-smelling, smiling, cooing, hungry, tired, gassy, screaming little bundle of joy. So now what? Where's the owner's manual for this thing? Where are my instructions? Right here. It's Baby and Toddler Instructions with Blythe Lipman on TogiNet.com. Infant care specialist Blythe Lipman has worked with babies for over 20 years and works extensively with new parents, providing workshops, in-home visits, tips, and daily phone calls to ease those frazzled nerves. With Baby and Toddler Instructions, you can get the advice you need on how to survive and enjoy your baby's first year. For more information on Blythe and how she can help you, go to babyinstructions.com. From 32 ways to stop a baby from crying to 14 ways to get a baby to eat and so much more. It's Baby and Toddler Instructions with Blythe Lipman on TogiNet.com.
Welcome back to Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network. By including the latest scientific research on the brain-personality connection, Julie Brain Lady Anderson provides her clients with the all-important why behind what people do and how they think. The information she shares will help those who hear to accelerate their success in life and business through the discovery of their natural gifts and maximizing their brain power. Here again is your host, Julie Anderson, with Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network.
Welcome back. Welcome back to the second segment of the Brain Lady Speaks radio show. Julie Brain Lady Anderson here, back talking about the hormonal effect on the teen brain. And before I went to break, we were talking about the melatonin. And this is going to actually, an adult, everybody is going to benefit from this next little bit of information, because melatonin is a very important hormone that acts as a neurotransmitter as well at times. It's manufactured in the pineal gland. That's pineal. And this gland is sitting back kind of right between your eyes, back right in the brain. And what it does is, it's really kind of cool, because as it starts to get dark, our brains automatically go, oh, okay, all right, it's getting dark, so I'm going to secrete more melatonin, and this is going to cause my host, the brain and body, to get sleepy. So therefore, when it's dark, I'm going to climb into bed, and my melatonin levels are going to be high enough where I am going to have this amazing, wonderful, restful sleep. And then as that sun slowly starts to raise in the sky, this pineal gland reacts and goes, oh, wait a minute, it's getting light, so therefore I'm going to start turning off my melatonin production, and that's going to allow the brain and body to become awake and alert and just have, function for the next day. And the great thing about this is when it's regulated normally, it gives us great night's sleep, and it helps us to have high energy or good energy during the day. Now, if individuals who have incorrect levels of melatonin in their system are not going to have a good sleep cycle, and therefore they're never going to feel right. Now, here's the little takeaway for every single person, and this is going to apply for your teens as well, because it's kind of messed up in the teen brain. It's not functioning at the proper level, including that teens need more sleep due to all of the growth changes that are taking place in the brain and body. When you are looking at a bright screen late into the evening, so you're sitting close to a computer screen, or you have that iPad that you're playing on, or your smartphone that you're texting back and forth, or your teens are texting back and forth to their best buddies on, or their BFFs, right? What happens is the pineal gland's not getting the darkness that it's supposed to be getting. It's because you've got this bright screen so close to your face. It's sending too much light into the brain, and what winds up happening is it doesn't produce the melatonin like it naturally would in a natural setting. So I always tell, whether I'm talking to a parent about their teen or I'm talking to just an individual about their general health, shut everything down at least an hour before you want to go to sleep. So if you want to be asleep in bed asleep at 11, then you need to stop messing on the computer and put the iPad and the phone away an hour before that, to give this pineal gland the opportunity to secrete the melatonin at the level that it needs to be secreted for you to have good sleep. Okay, so keep that in mind, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the teen brain and sleep here as we get towards the end of the show. That's going to help you to understand even more why it's important for them to get good sleep because of what's going on in their brain and their body. Okay, so moving on. We know that there are 3 main hormones that affect the teen brain, or affect the male and female brain, and really have a powerful effect on the teen male and teen female. And this is progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. And you've got to understand, when these start to really kick into gear and be produced in the brain and in the body in teens, it can have a sometimes quite disastrous effect. So at the onset of puberty, the hypothalamus, which is the master control for the endocrine system, or for the hormonal system, tells the pituitary gland to increase the hormone production in the body. And this is going to include an increase in this estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and then a whole host of other growth hormones that are necessary for the body to make its changes. Now, interestingly enough, the testosterone in boys, they're going to experience huge changes, obviously, in their body when the testosterone really starts to kick into gear, right? But in any given day during puberty, our adolescent boys are going to have 5 to 7 surges of this hormone pushed into their system. And the presence of testosterone at the end of puberty will reach up to 100 times that of at the beginning. So there's a huge change that happens in our young men during this time. And it's going to be 20 times as much high as any girl at a similar age. So there's a lot going on for our teen boys as they're going through this. Now, testosterone, the effect that testosterone has on the brain specifically is really interesting because it has a really strong effect on the amygdala. Now, the amygdala has special receptors that are specifically responsible for accepting testosterone. So this is testosterone's effect or influence on the amygdala is very strong. I mentioned David Walsh and his book that he wrote, Why Do They Act That Way, last week. And this is a quote from his book. He said, the everyday changes in a young teen's behavior are dramatic. Going into an 8-year-old boy's room is no big deal, right? But if you tread a square inch of the carpet in the room of a 14-year-old boy, you are likely to hear some version of, get out of my room. And that's because of the testosterone's effect on the amygdala, because the amygdala is responsible for a lot of very strong feelings. And when it's overstimulated, like it is during the teen years, it can result in strong feelings of anger, aggression, sexual interest, dominance, competition. Are these things that you've noticed in your teen boy that weren't there in your 6-year-old boy, right? And sometimes this is going to lean, and the boy itself, our poor teen boys, they're like, they don't even know what's going on. Because it's a surge, 5 to 7 times these surges are happening every given day. Every given day. So even our teen boys are like, I don't know what's going on. And remember, boys have a difficult time expressing their emotions because of the way their brain is developed as well. Just the structure of the male brain is different than the female brain, and that makes it more challenging to express their emotions. I can't go into a lot of that on this show. Go back and listen to the show on He Said, She Said, Who Said What, and that'll explain a lot of the differences between the male and the female brain. So really, this poor boy the amygdala is overstimulated, and he doesn't really understand what's going on. So it could lead him towards outbursts of anger, physical aggression. How many parents can say, yeah, there's a hole. I had to patch a hole in the wall when my son hit 15. I don't know what happened, right? And they don't know what happened either. So keep this in mind when you're dealing with the teen male. That aggression is going to be most likely a response of the testosterone's effect on getting that amygdala to hyper overreact. Okay. Now, it's going to be different, obviously, with the female, because in the female, estrogen and progesterone are the dominant. They are the dominant hormones. So it's different than the boys. The boys, it's the amygdala. In the females, it's estrogen and progesterone. And in the brain, it's the hippocampus that has additional receptors for estrogen. And interestingly enough, the hippocampus is the memory center in the brain. So this might be one of the reasons, researchers feel this might be one of the reasons why girls during this time period in their life tend to have a greater advantage over boys in memory exercises. Being able to memorize their, different facts or different things that they have to learn in school. That might give them a slight advantage over boys because of the estrogen that's activating the hippocampus more. It's also going to have estrogen and progesterone also have a very powerful influence over 3 main neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters, guess what, are norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. Now, these are neurotransmitters that have a very strong influence over our moods and the way we feel, our happiness level, or our lack thereof. The rise and fall of these hormones can create, of the estrogen and progesterone, can create a rise and fall over these neurotransmitters. So this could be the reason why you have this pubescent girl that at one moment can be, perfectly happy and up, and then you see her, she comes out of her room 15 minutes later and she's been crying. And you're kind of like going, what's going on? It's like, a couple of minutes ago, you were just fine. But when you begin to understand what's going on in the brain and the effect that estrogen and progesterone are having on your mood regulating hormones of norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin, you begin to understand why all of a sudden these girls or teen girls tend to have a much more dramatic mood swing than they'll have once they're in their 20s or they ever had growing up, or than even boys. So think about this. You've got the boys that have the surges of hormone and the girls that have the surges of hormone. And it could take years for all of this to balance out. It's really not going to balance out until they're well into their 20s. And depending on how we handle it as adults, or depending on what types of external influences, such as abuse, neglect, drugs, alcohol, smoking, all of those types of things during this very important, incredibly important time of a brain's development, it could really mess things up. And not just mess things up during that time period, but do just damage that cannot ever be repaired. And we're going to discuss that too towards the end of the show. And we're getting ready to go into a commercial, but I want to also remind you to think about the brain personality facets that are connected to girls and boys as well in terms of brain structure, just difference between the male and female brain, because that's going to affect how the little girls react, our teen girls react, and the boys react. And when you introduce all of these different hormones, you can wind up with a downward emotional spiral going on there. Okay, so get ready, get up and stretch and grab a drink, and we're going to go to break here, and join me in a few minutes.
With her thorough understanding of brain chemistry, Julie Anderson provides you with tools and processes that will change your life in a positive way. Julie uniquely blends science and psychology when she shares her knowledge and information with businesses, entrepreneurs, women's groups, and families to improve workplace morale and productivity, parents creating dynamic relationships with their children, and women achieving more in life and business. Julie Anderson will be right back with Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network.
If you're ready for a big change in your work, your career, your happiness, your life, it's time for the $1 Million Mindset with Marla Tabaka. Monday afternoons at 2, 1 Central on TogiNet.com. Marla believes that with the right mindset, anything is possible. Join us as successful life coach Marla Tabaka inspires you and her clients to explore, discover, and live your dreams by developing what she calls the $1 Million Mindset. Marla will inspire you to take action on your dreams and reveal secrets to success that will help you realize your own unique power. Tune into the $1 Million Mindset for heartwarming stories with Marla Tabaka. Learn tips and tricks to building a successful business and unlock the secrets to creating a happier, more balanced life through abundant thinking and attraction power. For more information on the $1 Million Mindset, go to our website, marlatabaka.com. That's MarlaTabaka.com. It's the $1 Million Mindset with Marla Tabaka. Monday afternoons at 2, 1 p.m. Central on TogiNet.com.
It's words you never heard. A few years ago, some fishermen off the coast of Italy discovered some pottery along with fish in their nets. Divers were called out and discovered an ancient Roman ship whose galley, or caboose, a nautical term for kitchen, was extremely intact. Some of the food uncovered on board was pickled fish, wine, oil, and grain used to make the ship's biscuits, otherwise known as dandy funks. It is thought the 2,000-year-old boat was probably on its way to Spain when it sunk and was covered by layers of mud, baggy wrinkles and all. Baggy wrinkles are another name for the ship's ropes. The mud protected the ship from wear, explaining why the leftover food on board was still in such good condition. We land lubbers may not be familiar with leftovers on the sea, but we are familiar with leftovers in our kitchen. It's words you never heard. I'm Carolyn Davidson, and you can have fun challenging your words you never heard vocabulary with my free app, Too Funny for Words.
Welcome back to Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network. By including the latest scientific research on the brain-personality connection, Julie Brain Lady Anderson provides her clients with the all-important why behind what people do and how they think. The information she shares will help those who hear to accelerate their success in life and business through the discovery of their natural gifts and maximizing their brain power. Here again is your host, Julie Anderson, with Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Okay. So all of those of you listening who are parents who of soon to be teenagers are probably ready to go just bury yourself in your room and never come out. No, they get through it. I promise they get through it. But it's helpful to understand what's going on. And I do want to mention too, with the mood swings that happen, and they can happen to the male, to the boy as well. It just seems to be more dominant within the female because of the effect that, that the norepinephrine or the progesterone and estrogen have on norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. It's just stronger in the females. And if you see in your child or in your teen that these mood swings are even more out of balance than what they should be, or they're gonna be out of balance, but if this goes into a deep depression where there's suicidal thoughts or there's other issues there, please get connected with a practitioner that specializes in depression. Don't ignore it. Let the professional tell you whether or not it's something that can be helped or should be helped. I mean, like I said, there's a certain amount that's just going to be natural, that's going to be going through in the brain, but we certainly don't want to run the risk of ignoring something that's much more serious. So that's my little words of advice there, or a disclaimer that I want to make sure that people realize that. Okay. Now, what happens to the maturing sexual brain? Okay, so as they're hitting on all of these hormones that are changing the brain, they're changing the body, it's becoming more sexual in nature, and sometimes the brain and the body are not exactly on the same track together. It's kind of like it's like things start to happen physically, but the brain might not always catch up. I can remember causing the teens to not understand the attention that they're getting or not really understand what's happening. I remember back when I was 13 and I was very outgoing. I've always been very outgoing, right? Outgoing little girl, and I always hung out with adults and chit-chatted because I love talking. And I remember when I was 13, and of course I had started to hit puberty and my body had started to hit puberty, and my mom took me aside and she said, "Julie, you've got to be more cautious about the way you act around your father's, the men that work at your father's shop. Things are changing." And my brain did not understand it at all. But now in retrospect, I totally and completely know what my mom was saying. So a lot of times the body starts to take place a sexual maturity and the brains don't understand that. So it takes a little bit of extra intuition and extra patience on the parent side to be able to help guide their children through this. But it also is affecting areas as these hormones, the same way that these hormones are affecting the body in a sexual way, they're also affecting the sexual portions of the brain. So for the boy, there's a rapid development that happens in the hypothalamus nucleus. Now, the hypothalamus nucleus is one of the portions of the brain that is directly related to sexual behavior, and it can cause an influx of sexual thoughts. And research has found that dopamine, this feel-good transmitter that we just talked about, is also linked to sex drive in boys and girls. So it starts to get these teens thinking about something and not really knowing what that whole universe of sex and sexual contact even has yet, because their brain's not developed yet. They don't have that experience. Now, the development of the hypothalamus will also relate change in the girl as well. But it's going to have a very different effect on the little boys as it is on the little girls. Now, teen girls always tend to be more relational, just as same as adult. It's just the female brain is a more relational brain. And so their brain is focusing more on relations when these feelings start to awaken within them. And their boys are always going to be more goal oriented. So the girls are going to have these emotions and these feelings coming into their brain, and they're going to be very moved towards romance, right? Boys, on the other hand, have that extra amygdala. Remember, we talked that amygdala was the aggression center, right? And they have the more receptors for testosterone. So that's going to cause them to be more territorial in nature. And their brain structure is going to be more single thought focused. So boys are going to tend to see girls as more of a conquest, a territorial possession as they're going through this time period, rather than just the relational part of it. And it's interesting when you look at the brain scans of young people that have been taken while they're looking at pictures of their boyfriends and girlfriends, it's really quite different. The University College in London helped us to understand what's going on, because they did these studies, and there are 4 main areas of the brain that were very active in teens when they were looking at pictures of their boyfriends and girlfriends. Now, 2 were in the cortex and 2 were in the deeper emotional, kind of the subconscious portion of the brain. But guess what was not active at all? That good old prefrontal cortex. And remember, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for all that logical thinking, the reasoning, the consequences to your actions. And it was not active at all in these teens. So it really showed that this romantic love for teenagers is based very much on emotion rather than thought. So if you are trying to reason with a teenager over romance or over their boyfriend or girlfriend, you're going to have a tough time, because their prefrontal cortex is not going to be active, and they're going to feel like they've fallen in love with their true soulmate. That's their life. That's what they're at that moment in time. To try to be reasoning with them is going to be really tough. Another thing to keep in mind, a gentleman named Dr. Peel, he wrote a book called Love and Addiction, and this is really, really, really interesting. He said that the brain activity, he was doing brain scans, the brain activity of a person in love, get this, is very similar to that of the person under the influence of cocaine. Interesting, right? Very, very interesting. So it's addictive. It can falling in love, that act of falling in love for some can become as addictive as a drug such as cocaine. A cocaine high releases dopamine that makes you feel really good. Norepinephrine causes quick reactions and decreases the serotonin, which helps to stabilize moods. And all of this is working when that romantic love is in play. So that's why you see all of this, boyfriends, girlfriends changing dramatically during this time period, because and some of them, if their hormones are exceptionally out of balance during the teen years, more so than normal, they're going to treat it. It's almost going to be like an addiction. So you throw all of this together. We start to put all of this together. Just really think about what is going on in this teen brain. There's so much activity in a brain that is not completely finished growing. And the results can be really, really chaotic, right? Very chaotic. So it's going to benefit every parent, every teacher, every counselor to take into consideration what's going on or not going on in the teen brain when they're interacting and when they're dealing with the teens. So think about this. We've got, just in review, last week we talked about all of the, all of the portions of the brain that were not quite active yet. We talked about the The prefrontal cortex, very critical area of the brain that is responsible for things like reasoning, judgment, inhibiting emotions, controlling impulses, rational thinking, problem solving, decision making, understanding one's consequences of their actions, understanding other people. It's not, the prefrontal cortex isn't active, right? It's just not completely wired, and it's barely firing at all. So you've got that going on. You've got areas of the brain like the amygdala, and we talked about the hormonal effect on the amygdala. But remember, we talked last week that it is what takes over because the prefrontal cortex isn't engaged, and it's working 80,000 times faster than the thinking brain. So it's going to jump into emotional, responses far more often than you would expect in a normal thinking brain. So you start to add this, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the portions of the brain that are reacting during times of emotional confrontation are totally different between the women, or between the adolescent and between the adult. And this causes the parents, of course, to have to jump in and do the more obvious adult thinking, right? So when we come back, we're going to shoot out here to another break. Boy, this show has gone by so fast. When we come back, I'm going to go over some tips. So I'm not just going to leave you hanging out there thinking, oh my goodness, I've got teenagers, I'm doomed, life is over for the next 10 years until they come out of the teens. No, that's not the case. It can be an absolutely beautiful time of life. I loved the teen years with my kids because it's a time when as this maturing is taking place, their personality is really starting to blossom, and they're really starting to start to figure out who they are and where they want to go, and really what their individual identity is, rather than just being the child of Mom and Dad Smith. Right now, they're starting to really develop this personality and this individuality that's beautiful in the teen brain. So it's a wonderful time of life, and I am going to give you some tips that'll help you to get through that easier. So join me back after break on the Brain Lady Speaks radio show.
With her thorough understanding of brain chemistry, Julie Anderson provides you with tools and processes that will change your life in a positive way. Julie uniquely blends science and psychology when she shares her knowledge and information with businesses, entrepreneurs, women's groups, and families to improve workplace morale and productivity, parents creating dynamic relationships with their children, and women achieving more in life and business. Julie Anderson will be right back with Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network.
Okay, ladies, listen up. Did you know recent studies are suggesting that women with skinny waists but sizable hips are smarter than other women? Scientists at the University of Pittsburgh and the University of California gave cognitive tests to a group of 16,000 women and girls of different body types and found the women with the greatest hip-to-waist proportions scored higher. I guess that would make me a walking Encyclopedia Britannica. No, hold on. That doesn't mean it's okay for us to be a powder pigeon. That's another name for a woman whose sizable hips can take up a whole supermarket aisle. Research suggests that the fat around fuller hips and thighs holds higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids, which helps the brain. I'm not sure if I would rather be able to do this Sunday crossword puzzle or get into those jeans I bought 10 years ago. I'm Carolyn Davidson, and you can have fun challenging your words you never heard vocabulary with my free app, Too Funny for Words.
We often ask, is that all there is? Why is this happening to me? Why am I always broke? How am I going to survive this mess? Then join Dr. Geraldine Tegeloff for Nature Spirits Speak, 7 p.m. Tuesday evenings on TogiNet.com. Geraldine is a metaphysician, nature intuitive, and prosperity coach who shares with you how she went from totally broke to living what she would call her perfectly prosperous life. Through the combination of a wealth of metaphysical knowledge and her amazing ability as an intuitive, Geraldine brings to you the secrets of her magical journey of healing emotionally, spiritually, and financially. As with the ancient seers and master teachers, Geraldine has the unique gift of being able to connect to the simple yet profound messages brought to us by Mother Nature, and happily shares these through today's note to self on her webpage, naturespiritspeak.com. If you need help with your journey, why not connect with Geraldine during her show, Nature Spirit Speak, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Central on toginet.com.
Welcome back to Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network. By including the latest scientific research on the brain-personality connection, Julie Brain Lady Anderson provides her clients with the all-important why behind what people do and how they think. The information she shares will help those who hear to accelerate their success in life and business through the discovery of their natural gifts and maximizing their brain power. Here again is your host, Julie Anderson, with Brain Lady Speaks on the Lessons in Joyful Living Radio Network.
Welcome back. Welcome back to the final segment of the Hormonal Teen Brain on the Brain Lady Speaks radio show. Okay, so I don't want to leave you just hanging and, ready to pull out all of your hair thinking to yourself that it will be an absolute miracle if you and your children survive this time in your life. There's actually a lot of very positive things that you can do. I mean, just taking in this information and being willing to apply it, that alone is, that understanding is going to reduce frustration tremendously. Just having that knowledge, because that's going to, now you're going to, every time you come to that confrontation or you have that emotional interaction, or your child is happy one minute and, crying the next, or, in love one minute and broken up the next, it's going to help you to understand. But there's also action that you can take when you're interacting with your teens that is going to be of even greater benefit. And I mentioned a few of these last week, but I think it's important and worthwhile to go ahead and reiterate them now, because it's just that valuable. So the first thing that I want you to do is think about acting as a surrogate for prefrontal cortex for your adolescent. When it comes to reasoning activities and consequences for one's actions, sometimes you have to actually spell it out to them in a very calm manner, because they're not going to always, they're not going to make those connections that seem so automatic and natural to us. So I gave the example last week, and I'll reiterate it now. Instead of saying something to your child like, hey, if you don't do good in your school and you don't get your homework done, you're not going to be able to get in college, and then you're not going to get a well-paying job, right? Now, we're not necessarily saying that in a negative way. We're trying to tell them, look, this is what's going to happen if you don't do your schoolwork. And, you might add in there, then you're going to live with your parents for the rest of your life. No, I'm just teasing. But their brain's not going to see the consequences of their actions. They're not going to understand that if they don't do schoolwork, they're not going to get a well-paying job. They're not going to make those critical connections. So ask them, reason, engage your prefrontal cortex and reason, and say something more along the line like, hey, what would you like to do as a career? What appeals to you? What are you thinking? What do you like? Right? And don't be judgmental over what they say. Chances are what they're going to tell you at 15 is going to be completely different as what they wind up doing at 23 once they have their whole brain to work with, right? But just let them express themselves. And then say, okay, well, that's awesome. That's great. That's a cool goal. I wonder what kind of specialized classes are you going to need to be able to get into that particular field? And you might list a few things. You might list a few of the things that well, if you want to be, a doctor, I'm just throwing that out there, you're going to have to, you might need to be really good, obviously not in penmanship, joke. No, you're going to need to know a lot of these things. So it might really help if you aced this class that you're taking right now, because that's going to help you get into your career easier, right? So you didn't tell them to do their homework without any explanation, and instead you helped them to see the need for doing it because they didn't have the prefrontal cortex to make that connection. Okay, so that's just an example. The second is to be clear about the message that you want to convey. Last week I talked about how teens tend to misread emotional expressions on a face, and most of the time they change it into anger. Fear and anger is what they wind up, reading the emotion on a face in. Even if it's surprise, they're going to process it as fear or anger. So you have to be really clear about what you want them to do or what you're trying to get them to see. Don't just tell them point blank, because they might read emotion into it that isn't there, and it isn't what you meant. So kind of use extra words and let them know up front. Always start on the positive. You're doing great at this, or you're doing great at that. Maybe we can do this, or maybe we can work on this together. Start off on the positive before you hit them with the counsel. That's always a really good thing, because that's going to help their brain know, okay, they're not angry, they're not mad, they're just talking to me, because you gave them the emotion. You set the tone at the beginning. All right. Be specific about your expectations. Don't leave room for interpretation, because their interpretation is going to be skewed. So I used the example last week of, don't say something like be nice to your brother or be nice to your sister, because that's too broad. Be specific. Say respect your sister's pride, or don't hit or yell at your brother. Or instead of saying respect your sister's privacy, say ask before you go into your sister's room. Ask if it's okay if you touch her phone, her tablet, or her gadget. Right? Be very specific. Okay. Important to engage your prefrontal cortex too. At times of stress, it's very interesting to me that at times of stress, the very first portion of our brains that shut down is the prefrontal cortex, even as adults. Because all of the oxygen and all of the energy and all of the glucose rushes down into the action portion of our brain. That's just what happens to a human being when they're under a lot of stress. So sometimes if you're really stressed out with your teen, or your child for that matter, your brain is not thinking clearly either. So you have to, as the adult, stop, take a deep breath, engage your prefrontal cortex, and start, talking and giving the counsel that needs to be given, or handling the situation the way you need to handle it. You need to also encourage activities that are going to help the adolescent get through this very difficult time. I talked earlier about the melatonin and sleep. Sleep is very critical for this time in a child's life or in a teen's life. Sleep period helps to rebuild and replenish cells in the brain and body. It's kind of like the defrag time for your brain. According to studies, the adolescent brain needs between 9 to 10 hours of sleep every day. But the teen brain's rhythm is all messed up because of all of these neurotransmitters and hormones that are fluctuating like crazy. So the normal sleep pattern is so messed up that oftentimes it tells the brain to shut down later. And the brain doesn't necessarily completely shut down until around midnight in teens, according to some experts. So that means that it's not going to be ready for work again until around 9 to 10 a.m. the next day. Crazy, right? Which means you got to make sure that they get plenty of sleep, and maybe even allow them to take, a nap during the day. It sounds crazy to have your teen take a nap, but if they're laying down during the middle of the day, go ahead, let them sleep, because sleep deprivation can cause impaired memory, increased cortisol, decreased reflex responses, and of course, intensify mood swings. You need to encourage physical activity. Not only is physical activity important for health in the brain and body, but it increases endorphins. And of course, endorphins are those wonderful neurotransmitters that will lift our mood and create happiness. So that's going to help them with their mood swings. I mentioned earlier external negative influences such as alcohol and drugs. You need to really avoid their exposure to alcohol. We know this, but alcohol stimulates a lot of bad things in the brain of a teen. So it can act like other drugs. It interferes the neurotransmitter activity. And that means that the messages that are being carried from cell to cell is inhibited. Alcohol stimulates the release of dopamine. So it creates an artificial dopamine release in the brain, and then the brain gets used to that at that developing stage, and it is very difficult for that to change in the future. So it means that young adolescent brains are more susceptible to this interference, and it can actually affect the growth and the wiring of the brain that will never be repaired. Okay, and the same thing with things like smoking. Okay, smoking can be very detrimental to the teen brain. It affects in the neighborhood of 24 different neurotransmitters. Nicotine does. Okay, and nicotine actually creates for itself a greater number of receptors in the brain, so it falsely encourages the production of dopamine, and the brain is still trying to figure itself out. So it's not going to be able to ever really achieve a natural balance when it is introduced into the brain at such a young age. It damages the brain permanently. And I am completely out of time. I tell you, these shows just go by so fast. So those are just some tips. If you want more tips, contact me, email me, shoot me, connect with me on Facebook, Purple Brain Lady, Brain Lady @BrainLady on Twitter. Send me an email, info@brainladyspeaker.com. Let me know if you have questions or you want some of the references, because this was all based on neuroscience. This was all based on research that is being done, and I would love to be able to provide you with that. So if you have questions about that, then, contact me. Contact me and let me connect with you more. Okay, that is going to just about wrap up the show for today. Thank you very much for spending this time with me again on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. or listening to the recorded podcast when it comes out later. Thank you for spending the time. I hope this has been helpful information for you as parents to look at your kids differently, look at your teens differently, take a deep breath, apply the information, and help to foster and nurture our amazing children as they grow. And if you want a consultation, if you want to work with me one-to-one, again, shoot me an email, and we'll talk about the different programs that I have to help you with. And other than that, I want you to have an amazing week. It's going to heat up here in Northern California. We're looking at, even though it's really cold right now, we're looking at 100 degrees next week. So I hope you have an amazing week. And we will talk to you on Wednesday, the 22nd of June, for the next episode of the Brain Lady Speaks radio show. Until then, have an amazing day.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Brain Lady Speaks with Julie Anderson. Julie Brain Lady Anderson is considered to be one of the nation's top experts on the brain-personality connection.